All right, so let's see what you got.
Awesome. So, this is what we currently have. So over here we have the toggle for the wrist view, and I don't know if we showed this last time, but we added kind of like this popover, to show that this is a new feature because in our past like testing, like people didn't realize the toggle was there. They basically looked at the individual issues first. And so we created this to draw attention to the risk view. And then these are pretty much the same. Some of the key changes is like combining um the dates and also the banner for like any overdue issues. Um, and then these still serve as filters. And then we also added like some additional context, for example, for like no activity, because they can customize these different um these different average conditions, and so we just wanted to provide more context on what they said. Um, and then so yeah, you can filter by overdue, display all issues, and then you can also collapse the top banner, and then it'll tell you how many issues might need your attention. Um, and then Chad, your feedback last time about accessibility. What we did instead is we now have a universal configuration gear icon. Um, the position of this is a little bit weird, but it should look like this when the side panel comes up. Um, and then in each of these, you can like edit further and set the conditions for these. Um, yeah. And then trying to think if there's anything else. But yeah, I think that was a rundown of our current prototype.
Hmm. Yeah, I think having
Yeah.
a single place to do the configuration for all of those is nice, because then you can also kind of you can see them in context with each other. You know what I mean? Like there may be things about two different ones that you want to change at the same time because a concern in one relates to another. That's nice. Um, can you show the state where you are filtered but it's collapsed again? I think you might need some indication in this narrow bar that you have applied some filter. So you do have the risk view toggle in the toggled on state. Um, but I would guess that in user testing, if you showed this to users and asked them what filter is applied, they'd say label group project management, and that's all they would think is applied as a filter. Um, yeah, I think you just need something there that's because it's really clear in the expanded state. I think it's pretty clear which one of them you've applied. Um, I think you just want to make it clear to the user that like some kind of filter is applied to the view based on this. Because I think that if this were real software and I were in this state and I turned off the risk view toggle, I would just go back to the normal state, right? So essentially that risk view toggle is telling me some filters applied, but the user may not really connect that that's what that means.
Mhm. Yeah. I guess um in that case, do you mean filters in the sense of like the search bar filters, or like in the top banner some sort of indication
I
that
don't think it
says
necessarily needs to be in the search bar because I think that putting it in the filter search bar opens up a whole different can of worms because there are expectations around functionality in there that I don't think necessarily are like quite the same as what you're doing. Um,
Mhm.
but yeah, I think something in your collapsed state that just lets the user know that there is something applied. Well, hold on. Can you expand it again? Because So I guess the only way to actually turn this off is either I click display all issues, and then I've got like the display change, but I'm not filtering at all. Or I just turn off risk view entirely, right?
Yes, yeah.
Like when risk view is on, I have to have at least one of these things applied. Like they're like a radio group, right? Not like checkboxes where I could have none applied if I wanted to.
Um,
Yeah, that's one of the questions that we wanted to ask you. Like, do you guys feel like it should behave like a radio button? So you have like total and then no activity? Or should it be just like checkboxes? So we don't have total, you can like multi-select
Well,
no activity or
yeah,
radio.
the thing with so multi-select is kind of interesting. I think it is just more complex on both ends, right? It's more complex for the user to reason about, it's more complex to implement. Um, I think that you could, in the collapse state, you know, I don't know. They'll take this as like, I don't know, what a definitive suggestion. But you could do something as simple as having like a single line of text beneath these issues need your attention that explains which of the risky filters is applied. You know what I mean? Like it could say like showing all 14 issues that might need attention, or it could say like showing 5 issues that have no activity, or showing 4 issues that are overdue. Some, just a real quick piece of information in the UI that doesn't have any functionality associated with it. You can't click on it to do anything, but just helps the user understand where they are. But that's I think the only feedback I have on that.
yeah. Um, let's see. Were there any questions that you had? Or does anybody else have any questions?
Oh, actually, sorry, I had another question about the no activity like footer.
mm,
Um,
s-
so there are a couple different variations you're showing here based on the configuration. Can you explain what the no activity configuration is in the prototype?
yeah, um, so there's, I think right now we haven't, I guess, specified specifically what's going to be in each of these drop downs, but um, I would imagine like currently what we have is that you can set it to um like since a milestone started, or like since it's been added to this specific label, because I think sometimes teams use labels as like different stages of their process.
Mm-hmm.
So like if an issue was added to like workflow testing, um, and there's been 5 days without any activity, or 12 days in that case, maybe that's some sort of indicator that, hey, maybe we should like check up on this issue. Um, and so over here, these ones are for like milestone conditions. I think maybe we can display the specific milestone that it's linking to, because right now we don't show that. Um, and then we also, let's see, moving to this list. I guess, yeah, in this case, this will be like, since workflow in dev was applied to this issue. So this is more for a label and this is more for a milestone.
I
Yeah, and one other thing that was changed was that, we can go back to the page. So like, I think one of the users like, oh, I wish we could define like what no activity means. So that's something we want your feedback on as well. So potentially we could explain like no activity is like no comments, labels, or merge requests. And you can also just say it's no comment or it's like no labels.
mhm.
So yeah, you can be as specific as you want with that.
I do think the ability for the ability for the user to change the title may be helpful, and if they can add additional ones, so they could have, you know, I could see someone having a specific one that's like it's been in this column for a while or something. I do think that days after the issue is added to a milestone may not mean much because issues should be added to the milestone before the milestone starts. The text you have in the footer says since milestone started, which is maybe actually a better measure, because if the milestone has a start date, then if there's been no activity for like 3 weeks after the milestone start date, then it's like, hey, that issue probably isn't making it into this milestone, depending on how long your milestones last. But that's something that could be configured. Um, Whereas I do think that if it's a label-based column, then measuring time since the label was added does maybe make sense because that's basically how long it's been hanging out in that column. And these settings, I forget. These are, what's the scope of this? Is this specific to the user?
Yeah, that's what we're thinking right now, but definitely open to other things too. So we're thinking it's like specific to the user and it's specific to this particular board. So
Hmm.
if it looks at two boards or three boards at the same time, they would have to like configure it differently.
Hmm.
But I don't know if we should allow them to like copy settings across different boards to make that process easier.
Sure. I would say that at this stage in a design project, I would add like the ability to like copy or duplicate board risk condition settings or whatever is the kind of thing that you could add to like a um further improvements or iterations on this in a future version kind of slide. Like we see some opportunities here to like mature this later by doing things like blah blah blah, and this is one of those. I would say that is probably about as much attention as you need to pay to it. Also, someone may ask you a question like I asked, and having an answer like that I think is sufficient at this stage.
Yeah, I think one question that I had, which is related to that part, is because I think the ideal state is that these configuration is based on individual users and also on specific boards. But I guess the other part of my brain is also like, but that feels like a lot of technical, like there's a lot of technical things that needs to be done to make that happen. I guess like, but
Maybe.
maybe that's just my assumption. But I'm
Well,
just curious, like, yeah, like how do you think about uh like yeah, like advocating for, I guess the more the ideal case in that case.
I would say there are two separate things to consider. One is like, what do you think is the right thing? Don't think about how hard it is to implement or not. Like, what do you think is going to work the best for the user? And that's the thing that you should argue for, and you should have good reasons for it. And then there's the compromise that comes after that, which is like, okay, but like, how do we make it happen? I do think that tech, like from a technical perspective, my like first stab thought about this is that like, there's not a ton of data to this. You know what I mean? This is like some JSON. It's not a lot. Like you've got what, one, two, three. You've got five things. Each thing has each thing is an object with like a couple of fields in it. Whatever. This is like less than a kilobyte of JSON. Um, I don't think it's a huge deal to have a separate one for each board that is specific to the user. I'm sure there's a place we could store that in the database somewhere. I don't think there would be like technical hurdles to get over to like having this implemented. I do think that there's a lot of stuff about this that is probably specific to a specific board. Like if you've got no activity conditions that are based on like a specific label, if you have a board that doesn't have that label, then like that just doesn't matter at all anymore. If you've got a board where nothing is in that specific milestone, it doesn't matter anymore. So I think these feel like they make sense. Um, being customized to a specific board. Yeah, I know. I don't know if that answers your
Yeah.
question. But
Yeah, no, I think, yeah, that does answer, because I think sometimes I grapple between like whether this is feasible or like this is what I feel like is right for the users. And so I feel like I'm definitely like focusing on what is ideal and I guess like what is
yeah,
right, and then
no,
kind of
I
thinking
definitely
about.
think, especially given the nature of this project, you are not going to get to the part where you like have the, horse trading conversations with technical leadership about how to like make this, make pretend real with this. So lean into the like, we have evidence-backed reasons to say that this is the best thing for the user side of it, and then it's up to somebody else later to figure out how to make it work right. That's like the one thing about this project I think we don't get to let you kind of have like a real world experience about, is the meeting with like a PM and a technical lead where you try to figure out like how you're going to do a first version, and what the sequencing is going to be of how things are built and all that sort of thing. But you'll get plenty of that later in real life.
Yeah.
You've got a couple of other topics. So the next thing you have on there is making a presentation to the UX team. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, we haven't started on the presentation itself, just because we are wrapping up the final prototype, and also we have some in-class assignments that are due before that. But I guess like the question that we had was just like how long should the presentation be? And yeah, any tips or I guess past examples of designers at GitLab presenting.
So, as far as past examples go, there is a video on the GitLab Unfiltered YouTube channel that is this from last year. It's last year's Tufts students making their like not final presentation to the teacher, but like their final like presentation to our team about what they did. So I can grab the link for that and share that with you. You can take a look at what they did. I would say I have not watched it. So I don't know if it's good or not. I think it probably is. Don't just like copy them, like verbatim in terms of format. Do what makes sense for you. But that's an example. I think that the meeting is I believe an hour. So I would plan for your presentation, believe it or not, to take like 20 minutes, because there's going to be some chit chat before, and there's going to be a lot of questions, and people will possibly interrupt you with questions. Like, don't worry about filling the time, worry about fitting it into the time, because it will take a lot longer than you think to do the whole thing. I would say focus in the presentation on telling the story of the project. Um, like spend some time with like, here was the problem that you originally gave us. Here's like what we thought. Here were our initial assumptions coming into this or whatever, and tell the story of the process that you went through. That I think the process is almost more important. I mean, especially for this because it's like a pedagogical exercise. But like later on, if you're presenting this as like a case study in an interview or whatever, talking about the process and what you did and what you were thinking is more important than whatever the final result was. So don't skimp on talking about the process, explaining the story. You want everyone who watches this presentation to understand the whole arc of the story and agree with you and understand why you made the decisions that you made along the way. You want them to understand why the things you were thinking about were worth you spending time on. You want them to understand compromises that you made if you made any along the way. And kind of the big payoff, right, is that at the end you do say, and here's the prototype, and you click around on the prototype and you show them. And what you want to have happen is at that point where you're showing them the prototype, this is the culmination of the whole story you just told them. You want them to be able to see the problem that you're solving with this. You want them to be able to imagine in their head, oh yeah, this totally does that thing. You want them to be able to see examples in the final prototype of places where you mentioned previously that you iterated and you like learned from something and added that in. Which I think naturally will happen because there are things in the prototype that I can tell you iterated on based on feedback either from our team or from user testing. I think the only thing to call out there is make sure that you talk about those things that you learned along the way as you go, because you're kind of like you're like I mean, Chekhov's gun is like a maybe too extreme, but like you're setting up a payoff later as you go through the story by saying like, and so in this user testing session we learned that like they wanted whatever, and like later it's there in the prototype. You know what I mean? You're showing that you like got value out of that user testing. Um, I would also say as a preparatory thing, this is not something that like goes in a slide. Usually come up with a list of questions that you think people will ask. You think that people who haven't been involved in the project the whole time might ask you. Just so that like as a team, you have some sense of like what your answers are for it. And don't softball yourself with those. Try to think of like, shit, what if somebody asks this? Try to come up with answers to those questions. Um, and then I think like the biggest piece of advice that anyone can ever take is like less stuff per slide. It's totally okay to have 100 slides if each slide has one easy to understand idea on it and very little text. Um, this is something that like, you know, in the corporate world, most slides are not made by designers. Most slides are made by people on the business side of things, and they tend to be just like a paginated Google Doc, just like lots of text. Don't do that. I'm sure you already know this, but don't do that. It's boring. People get lost. People stop listening to you because they're reading. Um, Try to have as little text on the slide as you can. Have visuals on the slide, maybe like a header on the slide that like helps the user understand where they are in your presentation. But yeah, that's like I would say like the number one like vibe killer in any presentation is like lots of text, because people start reading it, they're not paying attention. They'll ask you a question later about something that you said because they weren't listening because they were reading. Did Just don't if you don't do it, then it doesn't happen. Oh, also, I would say uh don't be afraid to have a sense of humor about it. Like this is not like, I don't know, like a science lab or something, or you know what I mean? Like I think from your Notion page, and like I think you've got like a sense of humor, you've got a personality as a group. Like don't be afraid to like show some of that in this. I think it's totally fine. I think there's an instinct which is not wrong, but especially in like junior folks, to like lean into like trying to be super professional. I've got it buttoned up or whatever. But what's actually professional is knowing what you're talking about, knowing what you're talking about, and having good reasons for why you did it, and making reasonable choices. Um, and it's totally fine to do that, and then also like use emojis or whatever. So yeah, I think it's also probably the presentation like might connect better with people. It might leave a stronger impression like if some of your personality is in it as well, and it's not just like a very like black and white by the book, here's a lab report kind of thing. So I don't know, that's my rant about making a presentation. I don't know what questions you might have about that. Or
No, that's really good to know. Thank you for that. It's actually similar to like what one of our professors tell us in a class, and we didn't get to learn it until like all the way in like junior, senior year. So it's like really good. reminder with the slides.
I know. No, Aria, you put down the last bullet in the agenda about feedback.
Does anyone else on the team have any questions or things that you guys want to cover here?
I did see you have some other stuff further down in the agenda as well, if you want to.
Yeah, I guess like one idea is just to have some, I guess like final feedback before we create the presentation. So yeah, we can do it like in whatever form you guys feel like is the best. And one idea is like, I don't know if everyone want to do like a quick 5 to 10 minute jam on Figma, just to like comment on the designs and see if there's any edge cases or small things that we might not catch just from verbal feedback. And then there are also just like some specific questions that I put down. So like either way, whichever one you think works best.
It's up to all of you. This is your time.
I guess we can set a timer for 5 minutes, or we can come at 11:40, and then you can either answer the questions in the agenda or directly comment on the Figma file. Yeah. How does that sound good? Okay. So yeah, let's do that, and then we can come back at 11:40. So 8 minutes.
All right, it is 11:41.
Yeah, thank you. Writing down comments and also answering the questions in the talk. I think one question that I had was for like the blue banner for like no activity since milestone started. Um, Chad, do you feel like there's a need to add the milestone number inside banner? Like for example, like milestone 17.0
That's a good
started.
question. Maybe. So let's think about how this works. So if I'm looking at a board, if the only filter on the board is that it's got this label, then I think the milestone is important because it's not presumed that there's a single milestone in scope that all of these issues are related to. If it's a board that is for a specific milestone, then maybe it's not essential, because if you say since milestone started, I think it's understood what it maybe understood what milestone you're referring to. But in that case, I don't think it hurts to have the milestone there. So I think so. I think it's worth exploring to see if you can, basically see if you can paint yourself into a corner with it. And if not, hey, great.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But I do think, it's similar to what's going on with the overdue, right? Because overdue is saying the specific due date. So saying the specific milestone might make sense. I think also blocked by one issue. You have a count there. I think it might be getting too deep in the weeds to have like some kind of clickable affordance there to see the list of issues that block it, because that's something you could do by just opening up the issue and looking at it. Yeah, I think showing the milestone there is probably reasonable, but it's up to you to figure out if that would fit. Thought had a really interesting question about showing labels, because we do have this setting already as a view option to show or not show labels. And it does seem like, I think implied in your design is that when you turn on this risk view, labels don't show anymore. But I think it's good to think about the edge cases of that. So like, okay, if we're not showing labels anymore, what happens if I open that view preferences dropdown? Is the show labels toggle turned on still, or is it turned off? And basically, like, is changing this setting going to maintain that other setting? Something to think about. I also, while you were adding some comments in there, I answered some of the questions that you have in the doc. So you asked if there anything you could tweak to make this adhere more to our design system. There are a couple small things I noticed. They're not huge deals. I think there are a few patterns that you're using that we don't like have a pattern for. So I think that's not necessarily something where like you would need to change it to adhere to our design system. It's more like if a designer were introducing this as a proposed functionality, we would have a conversation about like, what is the right way to do this? Is this a like generalizable pattern? Is this something that should be added to our pattern library? That sort of thing. So it's more, that would more spawn a conversation and maybe add something to our design system. Specifically, I think the stuff you're doing with the like condition criteria, we don't really have anything like that. I don't think we have any places where we have drop downs that are like semantically in line with text. So I think, there will probably end up being a conversation with our foundations team about that pattern. But it's not something you would need to like change to comply with it. There's nothing to comply to about that. Something else I commented there, this isn't really a design system thing, but I think it would be nice to have some screens for what this looks like if you're on your phone. Just to, it's a good practice to make sure, even though, most people use this on desktop, but you can look at it on your phone. And I think especially maybe less so for a board, someone's going to look at it on their phone. But there are certain touch points in GitLab that are important for us to make sure work well on a phone, because there's a link to it in an email that you might get as a notification. You might be checking your email on your phone. So if there's a link to like a comment thread on an issue or on a merge request in an email, we want to make sure that if you click on that on your phone, it's not like, oh God, oh no, kind of thing. For the board, like kind of less so, but just kind of like a dotting your I's, crossing your T's kind of thing. It'd be nice to see a screen for what like your design intent for how this behaves on a small viewport is. I wasn't really sure what you meant by your question about the dashboard footer. Are there too many solid colors?
Um, it was referring to the blue and red banners.
Oh, yeah, I mean, that is maybe like a pajamas design system question, is like, what is the right kind of semantic coloring for these? But I mean, the reason you turn this on is that you want to see what's O, right? So I don't know that it necessarily is noise, especially because it's not going to show all the time. But if you think it might be, um, you know, feel free to like make some variants. Because if nothing else, if the variants don't go into your final design, then it's something that you have as screens that if someone asks a question after the presentation about it, you can say, "Oh yeah, actually, we thought about some options for this," and you go over to the live Figma and you say, "Here's some other stuff that we thought about." Um, Off the top of my head, I do wonder. I don't know. Like it's easy to have like danger fatigue, I guess, with this kind of thing. Um, Blue is usually something we use for information. I think like yellow is usually what we use for like a caution, but not a big deal. So the ones that are blue would maybe actually want to be yellow, but then like there's also just like a lot of, yeah, I don't know. I don't think it's a big problem, but if you think it's something that could be a concern, um, feel free to iterate on it. And then also under the like GitLab item in your specific questions for later, you asked like what board configuration you should apply for the designs in the final. Uh, I think workflow board probably does make sense. Specifically, probably one that's scoped to a specific iteration or milestone is the best illustration for your use case. Um, I don't know if there are any. I don't know if there are any example boards that Amanda shared with you that would be a good fit, but you could like probably just literally, if she's got one that's like exactly the kind of board where this should show, you could literally just like copy exactly what it is, copy like the issue names, copy the just for verisimilitude. There are a couple other questions under there that I'm not sure how to answer. So you said if this is something the plan team is working on, what are some other things we need to flesh out? Um, I think you're thinking about edge cases right now. That's the comments you were going and adding. So I think that's helpful. Uh, honestly, this is kind of where like the part of this project that you don't get to do starts, is like the kind of the conversation with PM and engineering lead about like, here's what the design vision is, here's the problem we're trying to solve with this, here's the prototype. And then they are usually the ones who have questions about like, oh, like, how does this work with that? Or, oh, there's technical limitation on this. So I don't have any good answers for you on that. I do think that for the purposes of your presentation and for like, portfolio purposes, I guess your answer is basically like, we didn't do that part of the project, but I know that that's part of the project that exists, and here's how I would approach that conversation is something I think you can say. Um, and what is the gap between this and something an IC3 designer would be able to get to a shippable state before chatting with engineering or a PM? I think that this question might be coming at it the wrong way. You can't get something to a shippable stage before you include engineering and product. They ideally should be included like the whole way along. And I think that this is like kind of a weird like little like petri dish project, but like you kind of have been doing that the whole way. You know what I mean? Like we haven't been able to get you anything with engineers, which I wish in retrospect now we had. And I wonder if is there still time for that? Maybe there's not. But like, you've had interactions with product. I think that Gina and Martin and I have kind of also filled that role a bit, but like it's all collaborative. It needs to be collaborative from the start. And I think that's actually one of the signs of kind of a more senior operator in design is that you are doing a lot of talking and consensus building and collaborating, and not just going straight to like making screens in Figma. I think that's where a lot of the real work gets done, honestly, is the part where you like get everybody on the same page and get your head straight about what the thing you need to do is and what the constraints are. And then the, assets you create are like a step that comes after that stuff. So, I don't know that there necessarily is a gap there. There's certainly not something that's like easy to like put your finger on. I think a different way to think about this is not what's the gap. It's more like what have you learned that makes you better designers through this? And that's something I can't answer, but it is something that you should try to have a good answer for yourself for. Not necessarily that anyone might ask you, but I would encourage you to reflect on like skills or techniques or tips and tricks, whatever, that are going to make you a stronger designer coming out of this project. And especially actually you should probably have those in mind for like interviews and stuff later. That's an important thing I think at like a junior level when you're applying is like when you're showing portfolio stuff, like here are new skills I learned from this, here's how this like leveled me up kind of thing. And then looking at the features item, and Gina asked for edge cases, I think this view relies very heavily on using a board for a single milestone or sprint. What happens if this board is not filtered by a single milestone or sprint? Would the at-risk view toggle still remain in the toolbar? I think it's a good question. Aria said, do you mean the board setup like 17.0, 17.2, 17.2 is a different milestone as a list? How does issue boards know that it's not filtered by a single sprint? I think it should still remain in the toolbar because PM facilities the filter was behind the current milestone. Yeah, I think that this is a similar topic that I was curious about when I asked what the scope of the configuration for this is. It seems like if this is a thing that's available for all boards, but a specific configuration is specific to a user and a board, or at least specific to a single board, maybe if it, I don't know, maybe it's for all users to see that board. I think that probably works because when it's just a toggle and it's not turned on, you can ignore it. It's like it's not there. And I think that Gina's question may have been, I mean, I don't know, I don't want to speak for her, but I think Gina's question becomes more pressing if this is something that's just like a setting for all boards that you ever see ever. Definitely would be weird, right? Because there are like label specific and milestone specific and like maybe even assignee specific things in your filters that are not going to work universally. So I think scope helps with that. And then you said a user mentioned that they want to see if a task is overdue. What other tasks are being blocked? Should we include that? There, I think if I'm understanding this correctly, there's like a long-standing issue that hopefully will be resolved soon. That users want to see tasks on boards. And they're not there right now. So if you have an issue and the issue has like 3 child tasks, those 3 child tasks don't show up on the board at all, but they should. I think they will. I'm not sure if that's what this is getting at. They want to see if a task is overdue. So it'd be like there's an issue and the issue is not overdue, but the issue has a child task and that child task is overdue. Is that what? Um, yeah,
I
I
think
think
it was. Oh yeah, it was, yeah. Basically, what you said is like if a task is overdue, like how is it affecting any other like linked issues,
yeah. I
essentially?
think this is I think this is out of scope for your project. I don't think you don't need to worry about it because this is a more fundamental question about the nature of child work items. Is like if I've got an issue and it's got a child's work item and that child work item is overdue, does that mean that the issue should be considered overdue or not? This is not specific to boards. This is like an issues thing. I don't know what the team's take on that is, but it's not board specific. I do think that when tasks are a thing that we can show on a board, it makes some of it easier because you can see that task, you can see that that task is overdue. Um, Whether or not there is some specific blocking relationship between the child work items of an issue and the issue itself, I don't know either, but I think that's also probably like an issue generally thing, not a board specific thing. I think that the what you've got would work just as well if some of these were work items instead of being issues, you know?
Yeah. I know we're almost out of time. I had a quick question about the configurations. Um, just quickly. Um, so currently this is what we have, which is like one criteria in like one condition. Um, I'm just curious, like in terms of the demo and also the prototype, should we have the ability to have 2 criterias? The 2 that we can think of is like after issue was assigned to a specific label, and then in this case, this will probably be changed to after the milestone started. Um,
You
because it
know,
doesn't make sense to, yeah.
I think there are 2 different things to think about with this. One is that if the user has the ability to add their own new like at risk buckets, then I think that this use case we don't need anymore because these are really 2 separate things, right? This is like this has been in this column for a while versus like this is in the current milestone, but it's just like it's not moving. On the other hand, I do think that you may need to check more than one thing to tell if a single at-risk factor is true or not. So you might need this, but I don't know that this is a great illustration. Basically, I think basically what I'm saying is it may be necessary to have multiple criteria, but probably not or. Probably, probably and or not are the only operators that you would need. And like at a simple level, you could just say it's and there's no Boolean anything going on. because then, you know, if I want an at-risk factor that's like it's, you know, stuck, then that's like, you know, it like it's got this label and nothing's happened since, you know, for where however much time since this label was assigned. That's like it's stuck in this column. If I want like no activity, that might be like you know, no like no stuff since the milestone started. Um, you know, actually, it is tricky for me to think about a scenario where you might want more than one condition to define a single risk factor, but like, you know, I'm not the user, so there may be scenarios. I think that the single criteria version that you have is probably fine for an MVP. And I think that you have some design thinking about how you could add additional criteria. And then at this level of the, you know, at this stage of the project, I think that's sufficient. You know, this would be an input to a conversation with the PM and engineering about like how the project might progress, and they might have questions about the way that you know, add in additional criteria later. Probably what would happen if this were, you know, like a real project is like you would do more user research later about criteria. You would collect feedback from users about like limitations, things they wish they could do. You might get unsolicited feedback about it, people opening bugs that are like, I really want to be able to do this and I can't, it's blocking my workflow. So I, you know, I don't think you need to change anything about the prototype. I think you've got the design already that you can speak to if somebody asks you about it, you know? Um, and it's always, I think it looks good on you as the presenter if someone asks a question like, oh, what if people want to add multiple criteria, and you say, oh, actually, and you like scroll over in the Figma files like we thought about this and we left it out for this reason. I think that it shows good process. It shows that you're not just like throwing everything at the wall and seeing what sticks. It shows that you're thinking through things and you're choosing the pieces that um only the pieces that are actually necessary to move a solution forward. And like the, you know, that design you've got is not going anywhere. You know, like you've still got that design. So like if it comes up later, you're not starting from scratch.
Yeah, that makes sense. Um, yeah, does anybody else have any questions?
Oh yeah, this is more of a like logistical question. Since we have like our final presentation next Tuesday, I was wondering like if we still want to have our like weekly like Wednesday meeting like after the presentation or
Yeah,
like
I would say that is up to you. I don't know if I'm so I'm out next week. I'm going to join for your presentation on Tuesday. If you have a like a final kind of like wrap up meeting or whatever on Wednesday the 8th, if I'm available at that time, I think I'll join you too. I would say it's up to you. It may be nice as kind of a wrap up to just like do a retro. Like we could literally run it that way as just like a, you know, a retro on the whole project kind of thing. Um, but you know, up to you. I also don't know who is around. Let's see, there's three no's on it. Oh, okay, Amy and Michael, they haven't been really in the project, and I'm the only other one because I'm out of office. But Gina and Martin are both marked as yes. Um, so you know, I think it could be nice to do, but I also don't know what your schedule is like. Do you have class that day?
we're all done for class now. It's just like during it's like our final exams
Oh,
period.
okay, you're in what we call study week. I don't know. I think different schools have different names for it. Cool. Um, yeah, you know, I think it could be nice to have a retro. It's also like, you know, we as like the three of us on our end who have been working with you, and you are not going to have a chance to like talk or debrief during that presentation meeting. So I think it, you know, it could be a nice like kind of wrapping up loose ends kind of thing.
Yeah, I think that sounds good. We can definitely still have that meeting for like a retro.
Cool. All right. Well, unless you've got anything else, good luck. If you want to, you know, I don't know what the timing is going to be about it. So I don't know if I'll be around to give you any feedback on it. But if you want to like share a draft of your like slides in the channel, I'm sure someone would be around to give you some feedback on it. But you know, it depends on like what the timing is going to be on it. I don't know how soon you're going to work on that. Cool. Well,
Thank you so much.
yeah.
Yeah, we'll update you the slides.
Cool. I'm
Yeah.
looking forward to it. All right. See y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.